Hey, and welcome to this tutorial to build a stock screening app using the Marketstack API and Create React app. We're going to be building this app today that lets the user screen stocks based on their split factor and dividend yield. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to do is use Create React App to establish our app and set up our folders. Create React App basically lets you spin up a React app really quickly without having to worry about installing any dependencies or anything like that. So we're going to go ahead and let that start installing, and while that's working, we're going to go and look at the Marketstack API. So on the Marketstack website, we are going to sign up for a free account, which gives us 100 free API requests per month. You can sign up just by inputting some of your basic information, your name, email, give it a password, all that stuff. And then we are going to scroll down to the bottom. We're going to have to tell it that we're not a robot, and then we're just going to hit sign up. That's going to take us to the dashboard where you will see your API access key. I've blocked it out here for privacy's sake, but you're going to see also a quick start guide and links to documentation. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at the documentation. In the docs, you'll find an introduction to the API, you'll find the quick start again and some code examples. There's also an option to use this in Postman if you happen to use that, which is super useful. You'll see some information on the API errors and what you can expect to get back as error responses, and then it takes you into the endpoints and basically just gives you a rundown on all the various endpoints that are available to you and what the data returned looks like. The two endpoints that we're going to be using are the splits and dividend endpoints. So for now, just go ahead and make a note of those URLs and your access key, and let's have a look at our React app. So it looks like it's finished installing here, and we can go ahead and start it just by cding into the folder and running npm start. That is going to immediately spin up the app in the browser, and as you can see, they provide us with some boilerplate, this nice spinning logo, and a little bit of text here. So let's actually first thing go ahead and look at this in our code editor. And the first thing we're going to do is just take a look at app.js and take a look at how this is all set up. So as you can see, that's the logo that they're importing there. Then they're rendering the logo here in their JSX. And we're actually going to just go ahead and delete all of this boilerplate because we're going to work right in this file. So this is going to give us a nice blank slate. And so then if you save the file and go back into the browser, you'll see that that logo's gone, all that text is gone, and we have a nice blank slate to start working with. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up an environment file to hold our environment variables. This is not actually a real .env file. I'm kind of just mocking this out for the purposes of the tutorial. But go ahead and create an environment.js file and then paste in your access key and the two URLs. And you're going to replace your access key, obviously, with your real access key. And then these should be the two URLs for the endpoints that we're using from the API. Next, we'll come back into app.js and we'll start with a query to our endpoint. So I've set up a couple of things here. I'm importing a couple of things at the top, the access key and the two URLs, obviously, and then a use effect from React. And this use effect is a React hook that runs, we're passing it an empty dependency array, so it's going to run when the app mounts, basically. This is kind of like component did mount, if you're familiar with like the old way of using React. So we've passed it this empty dependency array, so this use effect hook is going to run when the app loads, and it's going to call this get split data function, which I'm going to write right now. So this get split data function is going to call our API. It's an async function, and there's a try-catch block inside that basically uses fetch to hit the endpoint, providing our access key as a query parameter. And we wait for that response to come back. When the response comes back, we're going to turn it into JSON, and then we're just going to log that to the console for now. And then at the bottom here, obviously, we have our catch block with our error handling. So let's go ahead and take a look at how that runs in the browser. So if we come into the browser, obviously there's nothing being rendered, but we can open up the console and we can have a look at that object that's getting returned from our API. And as you can see, it's an object with two values. One is some information about pagination, because there's tons and tons of results that are available through this API. So they're only sending back basically the first 100 results. And we're just going to work with that first 100 results for the purposes of this tutorial. As you can see, we're returned a stock ticker symbol and then a split factor and a date. So as you probably remember, we actually have two endpoints to hit. So we want to update this getSplitData function to actually hit both endpoints and return all of the data we want for our splits and our dividends. So we're going to update this splits call to give it a different variable name, basically. And then we're going to log that data. And then we're going to do the same exact thing for the other endpoint. So we'll call this one divs response. And that's going to call our dividends URL, which is our other endpoint. And then obviously we need to update this variable name as well, and then we'll log this data to the console as well. So what we should expect to see is that when this gets called in the use effect, it's going to now hit both of those endpoints and return to us two response objects. Unfortunately, we've made a mistake somewhere, as you can see, but this is good because it proves that our catch block is handling our errors correctly, which is great. So it's telling us that response is not defined, and actually I think I know why this is. So if we go back into VS Code and take a look at that function that we just updated, I've called this splits response, but then I didn't update this variable name here. We're still calling this response. So obviously we need to just change that there. And then we need to change it here as well. And now if we save the file and we go back to the browser, you'll see there's no errors, and there's that first object getting returned to us, and there's the second object right underneath it. So right now we're basically getting back two raw objects from the API that have a ton of data in them. This data array is 100 entries long, and we don't actually want to show the user all this data. We want to show the user a filtered set based on some criteria. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a function that processes these two data arrays and returns only results that meet the criteria that we provide, so that we're showing basically a filtered set of options to the user. So let's go back into VS Code, and we're going to create a new file called services.js. And this is going to have a helper function in it that's going to handle filtering our data. So this filter market data function is going to take in the two arrays that were returned from our API, and it's going to filter those two arrays based on some criteria. So for our splits, we only want to show the user stocks with a split factor that equals 2. And for now, we're just hard coding these values. We're just kind of arbitrarily deciding on these numbers. Later, we'll have the user input these values themselves. But for now, just to get things moving, we're going to hard code the values. So we're going to look only at split factors of 2 and at dividends only with a dividend yield greater than 0.5, which is 50%. Then we're going to basically create a nicely organized object with our splits and our divs, and we're going to return that from this function. So now in app.js, instead of just logging this raw data to the console, we're now going to capture it in state. So we're going to add the use state option from React, and up here we're going to initialize some initial state. So we'll call it stock data, and then set stock data will be the function that we use to update this value in state. And we're going to start out with it just initialized as an empty object. So now when this function call hits our API, instead of logging this to the console and instead of logging this to the console, we are now going to run that filtering function on the data that we got back. So we'll basically call it market data. We will call our filtering function. we will pass it the two arrays from those response objects. And then we're going to set that market data object as our state. So just to recap real quick here, we have an object in state that is holding the response from our API, and that object looks like this. It's got our splits and our divs, which are two arrays on it. So now we want to render that state to the UI. So I'm going to paste some code in here because it would take me forever to type all this and it would be excruciating for you guys to watch. But basically what's going on here is we just have a header that kind of tells us what the title of the app is. We have a containing div with a class on it, and we have two divs inside it that are rendering our two lists of stocks. So the first side, we're showing our splits based on our split factor filtering function. And inside here, we just have an unordered list, and we're iterating over that array of splits. And for each split, we are returning a list item. And the list item has a key. React always wants you to give every iterated object a key, so that it knows, where it is in the UI. And inside that list item, we're just going to render the symbol of the stock and then the split factor of that stock as well. And then underneath, we're basically just doing exactly the same thing, but for the dividends array. So these are the dividends that we've decided we want to show the user. And again, we are just have an unordered list and we're iterating through that array. And for each item in the array, we are returning a list item with a key and with the stock symbol and the dividend listed there inside it. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at the CSS for this. So I deleted a lot of the boilerplate that was in here, and then I've added these classes. So our market info class, this is our containing div, and it's flexboxed to basically render the two lists of stocks side by side. There's a nice little border around it. These are the headers for our each side of our stock display, and then these are the unordered lists. I've done list style none to remove any bullet points or anything like that. And then this is each list item, which displays each stock. So if we come back to the browser, now we can see that this is all rendering really nicely. We've got our heading up here, we've got our containing div right here, and then we've got our two divs displayed flexbox inside it with our splits on one side and our divs on the other. And then I just realized I'm saying divs for dividends and also divs for div, but obviously dividends is the stocks that we're displaying and divs is the containers. But yeah, you can see everything here is rendering based on our filtering functions. We're only seeing split factors of 2 and dividends greater than 0.5. So this all looks really nice now, but it's not actually super useful, because right now all we're doing is showing the user some stocks based on hard-coded values that we've arbitrarily decided. So I refreshed the app there and you can see basically the app loads and then we're just showing them these stocks. What would be great is if the user could decide what split factor they wanted to see and what dividends they wanted to see themselves. So what we're going to do is we're going to give them some inputs to decide on a split factor. Down here we'll give them an input to input what split factor they want to see, and down here we're going to give them a way to input a threshold. And then we'll give them a button here that lets them filter all the stocks based on those two criteria. So let's have a look at how that is going to work. All right, so first we're going to deal with our split factors. So I've hard-coded an array up here of basically commonly occurring split factors in stocks, or split factors that a user may want to see. And I've just thrown 4 values in here. You could, if you wanted, put more, or you could even have the user input, what values of split factor they wanted to see. But for now, for the purposes of this tutorial, we're just going to go with this. So the first thing we want to do is we need a value in state to hold the user's choice. So we're going to present the user with these options of different split factors that they can view, and then we're going to have them choose. So when they make that choice, we need to capture that choice and hold it in state. And then underneath our div here, where we're rendering the stocks, we're going to give them basically a set of radio inputs. So there's a label at the top, and then we're iterating over this hard-coded array of constants to show them each option. So for each option, we return a piece of UI that basically is a radio input, and the value of that radio input is the split factor that we want to show them. And when they choose that split factor, we're going to update the state to hold their choice of that value. And then here, we basically are telling the radio button to be checked if the split factor that they have chosen matches the split that this radio button displays. So now if we take a look at our UI, you can see our radio buttons are being rendered right underneath our splits and basically presenting our user with some options for what split factor would you like to see. And I'm going to open up the console here because I throw a console log in there just to show you that when I choose these values, the state is being updated to hold that value. So now we basically want to do the same thing for the dividends. So for dividends, what we're going to do is we're going to let the user input a threshold, and that is basically going to be the minimum percentage that they want to see. So only show users stocks with a dividend yield of a greater percentage than what the user puts in. So we've given ourselves some state to hold the user's choice, again, the same way we did with the split factor. And underneath our dividends, we're going to render an input that's just a number input. And so this is going to basically allow the user to increment or decrement the number. And we're placeholdering it with percentage because this is a percentage. And then when the user changes, we're capturing the event that happens on change, and we are setting our dividend threshold in state to the value of that event. We have to cast it to a number because frustratingly, even though the input is type number, for whatever reason, the HTML stores strings. So you have to cast the type to number, which is a little annoying, but that's kind of just one of those weird code things that you have to deal with. So yeah, these are our two inputs, and let's go ahead and just take a look at how that one looks in the UI. So here's our dividend threshold, and then here's our number input where the user can increment to say, I want to see stocks above this dividend percent. So now that we've captured our user's choice in state, we want to use that choice to filter our results arrays. So we've got our split factor and we've got our dividend threshold, but we want to pass these to this filtering function so that instead of just using hard-coded values in this function, we're actually using the input that the user gives us to filter those arrays. So the first thing I've done is added a button down here called filter stocks. And this is going to let the user basically filter the stocks on click. So the click handler here is called handle filter market data. And we're going to write that function right now. So this is an on change handler that is basically going to call our filtering function when the user clicks it. And in that filtering function, we're going to pass our splits array that got returned from the API and the split factor that the user chose by inputting on that radio button choice options that we gave them. And then we're going to pass our divs array as well, and we're going to pass the threshold that the user set for the divs. And then inside the filtering function, we're going to pass those arguments. And then instead of using the hard-coded values that we were using before, we're going to replace those with the user input. And we're going to divide the threshold by 10, just because it is a percentage and what we're getting is a whole number, but what we want is a percentage. So now if we come back into app.js, you're probably thinking, well, hold on a second. How are you passing this splits data from the API response into the function? Because before, we were just grabbing it right from the response and we were just passing it right into this filtering function. But now we're calling this filtering function totally separately. And so we need to figure out how we get these two arrays actually into our function. The way we're going to do that is by capturing the arrays in state. So we're going to create two new values in state called split data, and that's our updating. This is the function that updates the state. And we're going to initialize that to an empty array. And then we are going to have another value called div data. And again, we have an updating function for that one as well. And we'll also initialize that to an empty array. So now in our fetching function where we hit the API for this raw data, instead of setting that raw data into state and displaying it in the UI, we're now going to let our onClick handler do that. So the onClick handler is filtering our results array and setting it into state. And now our fetching function is just going to set those two results arrays into state so that we can use them later. So we'll call set split data here and we will pass it that array that came back from the API. And then the same thing with the divs. We'll call set div data and we'll pass it that array of dividends data. And now here in filter market data, instead of being passed the direct result of the API call, we're now going to be passing it those values from state. So we just need to update the variable names to match the variable names that appear in state. And that should be good. So to recap, basically what's going on now is the app loads. It calls our getMarketData function in the useEffect hook. That getMarketData function calls the API. It gets back these two results arrays. And instead of displaying them, it just puts them into state so that we can use them later. Then the user decides what split factor and what dividend threshold they want to see. They click the filtering button. Our filtering function gets called. It filters all of that data based on the split factor and the threshold that the user input. Our function runs and it returns this nicely organized object with our filtered arrays, and that gets set into state, and then that is what gets displayed to the user. So let's take a look at all of this in action. As you can see at the top here, there's no data at all present. When I set a split factor, and then I come over here to update my threshold, and then I click filter stocks, now you can see all of this is returned to us, and it looks great. So that's it for this tutorial. Thanks so much for watching. Go ahead and check out the Marketstack API. They have tons of great documentation. They have blog posts. They have video tutorials. You can sign up for a free account. That'll give you 100 free API calls per month, and you can have a go at implementing this tutorial. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks so much. Bye.